Good morning. Today is Saturday, September 5th, and as a part of our conversation with artists and as we're investigating the ways in which art and arts education is a social justice issue, I am here today with Nathaniel Donnett, the extraordinary visual artist, and we're here to talk with him about those issues, but also learn more about him and the trajectory of his work. So good morning, Nathaniel. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, good morning, Michon. How you doing?
I'm good. So excited to have this conversation with you, and I'll begin this the way that I have begun with other artists in this project. How were you introduced to the arts?
Well, I always like to, whenever I talk about the arts, I always like to make a note that for me, the arts is about art and life. And I think that they're outside of traditional understanding of art, and we'll probably get into that later. But so saying that, the way that I was introduced to it was just being a kid. Now there's like specific things that happen that I could look at and say that those experiences were specifically art related. So one would be comic books. The other would be cartoons. And mainly I used to look at a lot of cartoons that had like musical elements or musicians in them, like Fat Albert, Jackson 5, Sesame Street, stuff like that. And then just drawing from like GQ magazines, which is where I got my sense of color from. Before, I really, after thinking about it, it's kind of where my sense of color came from. I was also introduced in the arts in church. And by that, again, going back to the life thing, my idea, for me, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. And so my idea of art isn't, I guess, limited to like a two-dimensional, three-dimensional kind of making and dealing with objects. It also deals with sound, music, language, all different types of languages, body language, verbal, and all of those things exist for me in the Southern Black church. That was in Third Ward, Progressive Church, when I was a kid. And then there's dance. So all those things are related. So that's how I got introduced to it in a way that's outside of a formal idea of art. But when I attended Jack Yates, as you have, I wanted to be in band. So I signed up to be in the band, the marching band. And at that time, what people would call rebelliousness, or my view of looking at things through opposites or difference, came in the sense of temper, right? And so I would and assumed like ignorance and overconfidence. Since I was self-taught how to play the drums, but not knowing all the other things that go around it, discipline and all those other things, because I was just doing it. Like I said, it was just part of the things I did. I didn't know that there was other things that could go along with it. I got into an argument with the band director, and so she ended up kicking me out of the class and telling me to go to the principal office. So I went to the principal office, and then they asked me, well, you need to be in some kind of class. What else can you do? And I liked basketball, but I wasn't really into it. I was into a lot of stuff. So I told them, well, I can draw really well. And they said, oh, okay, good. We could put you in this drawing class. And it was Miss Geraldine Crossland, who was also a student of John Biggers and went to Yates. And she was also, oh yeah, because she was a cheerleader. So she was, yeah, so she did all those things too. So I was in Miss Crossman's class. So that's how I got introduced to art formally, you know. So that's how that came about.
It's really interesting earlier on when you were talking about your initial exposure, formative exposure. I heard some really interesting notes there that are parallel to what Richard Wright said about the pillars of Black culture, the church and stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so your ability to really be so aware of the church as that formative, that's part of your formative exposure to the arts is really interesting. I hope we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that later. And stories. You know, you shared with us a little bit of your biography just now, but I'm looking at the ways that you charted your own path to the formal exposure to art, and you know, you are mirroring exactly what it said. That's part of your becoming a member of this strong arts culture and actually being a forerunner right now at Yale. So can you talk right now, talking about Yale, and you know, how did someone who happened to be so aware when he was so young about art, did you know it as art when you were exposed to it?
I did not.
So how is someone who kind of stumbled into his own artistic capability, his being self-aware that he was capable of drawing, and then kind of being happily landing in the arts formally, how did you make that transition to professional career and now become a part of the Yale community, the arts community there?
Yeah, it may come up again in these questions, but the transition was a long one and a difficult one because like even at the moment of taking art in class, I was in the moment and I wasn't necessarily thinking about where this could lead to. What I did realize is that, you know, after being in the class, I understood that I did want to be an artist, right? I didn't know what all the spectrum of what that meant. And at the time, once I graduated, I still wasn't, because art didn't, it seemed to be only, and it's kind of like that now in a sense because of the lack of awareness and the thing about what you do in terms of art education. There still seems to be, art seems to be in its own social umbrella outside of the greater space, even though we know that all the things in terms of the elements and ideas about art and the ideas of imagination and creativity, purpose, experimenting, failure, all those things are part of the bigger scope. But we don't draw those connections. And so I didn't necessarily draw those connections. And all I knew about is that, you know, at some point, because you know, my mom passed away when I was 18, right once I graduated. So I didn't have any direction, and being poor and Black, I didn't have a doctor that I can go to, or there wasn't a doctor down the street, or my family didn't have relationships with doctors, or therapists, or psychologists, or psychiatrists. So it was just me going through an experience of self-therapy through life. And so that's why it was kind of long and drawn out, because once I entered TSU, I ended up dropping out. And then in hindsight, looking back, it was me trying to negotiate and navigate all that trauma that I had gone through, that I didn't know what it was, just living, you know. So I ended up going into back to a direction of music and dance. So I you know, got into like hip hop real heavily, and doing all the elements, well, most of them, like doing graffiti, dancing, and then eventually rapping a little bit. So I got into all of those things. And then those things kind of, in terms of surviving and living in that world, because the hip hop world has its own kind of framework of rules. And one of them is do it yourself and make a way. Mm-hmm. Although that those rules overlap and share other kind of spaces too. You know, that would just be Black life, period. You know, but that specific was that. So I learned a lot through that. So like the friends I hung around, we would all be in one apartment. You know, it was like 4 of us, and like all of us were dancers. Then we would have DJs come over, or we visit DJs. Sometimes other musicians and rappers would spend the night. So it'd be like this kind of big camaraderie of energy. And so what I learned through that, and I'll go back to my childhood too. Oh, I guess I need to go through it. What I would learn through that is how to work with other people. You know, other people who have similar interests. And so I think that helped formulate the idea of collaboration and helped formulate the idea of determination. You know, that not helped formulate it, but kind of accentuated it or amplified it. And so then I eventually started going back to TSU and taking class here and there, and then taking some courses at Houston Community College. So eventually I ended up graduating. Now, even at that point, before all of that happened, I was still working as an artist, operating as an artist. So I was still developing the skills of technique, understanding composition, understanding like ideas of color and communication, content, context, history, and how it relates to what you're doing or what you aim to do. I had to sell art, so there's a economic component in there in terms of like commerce, you know, and it was not for like being famous, so it was just basically survival, basically. And I had all these different jobs, right? So all of this stuff kind of basically build this experience to the point of your answer is like, I end up recognizing and reflecting that I needed to do something more. And part of that more came into graduating and finishing at TSU. So what I started understanding about myself, and I think being an only child helps, what I started understanding about myself is that it's something I'm trying to aim at, but I don't know what that is, right? I don't know what that is. It's just knowing I want to be better than what I am or where I am and develop. So I had conversations with a friend of mine, Robert Pruitt, Dr. Warlaw, and William Cordova, and my wife. And they were always saying I should go and get my MFA. But even then, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But even then, Yale was not like the target. It was just get an MFA to develop, you know, to gain, because I'm always on this. It seems like I'm on this journey for something. And so I applied, you know, and they accepted me. And it wasn't my first, actually, it wasn't even my first choice. And it was my last interview, which is kind of odd, but my guess is it works like it works. So that's how I ended up at Yale. So I know I'm skipping a lot of parts, but yeah.
No, I think this is so amazing. I hear so many interesting nuggets that I just want to spend so much more time on with you. The idea that you mentioned art as therapy, right? And you also talked about art as commerce for you. One of the elements of your survival early on. Let me just ask you a question really quickly about the kind of art that you created early on. You knew that you were going to be selling it. Did your subject matter, did you cater your subject matter to people who were prospective buyers of your earliest art, or, you know, were there certain messages embedded? Were you not even that self-aware about the kind of art that you were generating? Or
well, I've always been aware of what I was doing and why. I would say there's a level of awareness, but the degree of awareness would ebb and flow, and then would gradually come, you know, would increase over time, right? But in the beginning, I was doing like all different types of things, I guess, like I'm doing now. So like as a group, we would We were making clothes. We were trying to fulfill, put something in a space that we thought was empty at the time in the 90s in terms of like hip hop identity. So we were making designs for shirts. I was doing the airbrushing. So it was a lot of commercial work in that, but it was with the idea of trying to make something visible. I didn't have that language then, but that's what I was doing. And but doing graffiti, the commerce part was saying, okay, well, I want to sell these type of things, but I was also doing commissions for portraits because I was really good in terms of replicating the image. Even though I don't really do that, but I was at the time, you know, it was a way to, people wanted to see themselves, like I guess like they do now. So I did portraits. We did portraits on the spot. We did portraits on clothing. We did portraits, you know, that was on paper and framed and on canvas. And we kind of catered to like the space that we were familiar with, you know. But on the other end, and that's the commerce part, but on the other end, there was the graffiti thing that had nothing to do with commerce and had everything to do with responding to an environment and even rebelling against the idea of what we thought or what others would consider traditional high art. And so that graffiti thing, and I was good, but I was not the best. And I didn't do a lot of it, but I did it. And so the graffiti thing also informed a lot of the things I do now in terms of scale, you know, like large works. In terms of I think, and for graffiti, if you have to have an idea where you want to go with it, and understanding your materials, you know. And I think this also helped me subconsciously start thinking about installations and thinking about the public in general in terms of my work. And so you are communicating, you know, well, I mean, this is something everybody know now, I guess, but at the time, you know, I didn't know it, I was just doing it. But then, you know, I was communicating with the public, and I was doing it in a way too that also was subversive and not always present for the larger, greater public, but for a smaller, intimate group that also didn't have relationships with quote unquote museums and art institutions. So I think that was very important. So like all of this kind of tracking was like really part of me being where I am now. Yeah. So there was a commercial aspect, and then there was a non-commercial aspect.
Right, that idea of the subversive, carving a space, creating space where there is none,
right?
And you know, the commerce part being secondary. I mean, necessary for survival certainly, but charting or creating some kind of space for and vying for visibility. I think that's really important. That's something that not all artists are aware that they are doing, but I think that in and of itself is a large part of what we're talking about when we try to correlate social justice with arts and arts education, that presence and that ability to vie for visibility within a space where there usually is none for the Black body. I think that's really key. But that previous slide that you were showing, those are images of your home, where you grew up?
Yeah. So the first one is when I lived in Mount Kennedy, right next to, I think they call it Yellowstone Prep now, but it was Douglas Elementary at the time. So this was a duplex. Okay, so this is tricky. So we moved when I was in the 6th grade, and I went to moved to South Union, which is not that far from 3rd Ward, right between 3rd Ward and Sunnyside. Mm-hmm. And we moved into this image on the right. Now that looks like a house, right? But it's really a triplex. It's like 3. So it's still like you're still in the similar space, but there's a there's more space. So I'm getting to the point. So there's more space, right? There's more space. That was my bedroom and my mom's bedroom. But you're still confined to something that's very similar. And so what does that mean and what am I saying about it? I'm saying like we could create these illusions of freedom in these spaces that we call these urban spaces that Black people occupy. But the thing is, the bigger scope is just the same space. And I know that sounds pessimistic, but just because you move a little bit to what one considers successful or bigger space, that is not the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture is like the overall scope of what Black people, in terms of social justice and all these other things, what Black people have to deal with, whether they recognize it or not, or whether they are able to move a little bit up or to the right or to the left from where they are. You still have a bigger picture you have to deal with. And that bigger picture.
So representation and visibility don't necessarily equate to equity and social justice.
No.
Yeah.
And this is also a substitution. So I would also add a substitution of what you assume to be representative of yourself. If that substitution goal is not to further or transform, the entirety of the space, then you're really just moving spaces for a few people, or to still push along the oppression or the narrative that's stepping down on you in the first place.
Right, kicking the can down the road, so to speak, and other people feel it. You may elevate yourself and become this exception to the larger rule, but oppression still exists. It's not eliminated or eradicated.
Right.
That's yeah. I can't wait to have this panel discussion because that's really profound. Okay, so you were going to start showing those. Yeah.
So this is important. This kind of thinking is in terms of my. I think this is one of the. I think the artwork gets you into Yale, but I think the thinking and the way that you think about things also gets you there, or wherever, but just specifically for me, And so I think we are overlooking these two things right here. These two things, which what I'll put in like the category of the everyday, which I'm interested in as a dark imaginarist practitioner or artist. I'm interested in our everyday in terms of like just life and material, because I think it's important because those things is where all of the invisibility lurks. So this is, for those who don't know, this is on the image on the left. These cars are part of what you call Houston's car culture slab, and that's capital SLAB, and that's associated with screw music, which people may be more familiar with DJ Screw. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about at Yale and then just in my practice is how like these everyday things in terms of a argument about art or traditional art or what's not art or what's been overlooked and not placed in the art canon are things like this. First, there's all of these elements that I've always said that are incorporated into this culture and this, specifically this car. So you have like there's sculpture involved in here with the swingers, which are the rims on the cars are sticking or poking all the way out. Then there's the idea of painting in terms of the candy paint and the way that it's painted and the finish that it's painted in, which is glossy, and how that paint acts in the sun. Then there's the sound component. So when you open the trunk, there's speakers and all these things are like specifically designed according to the person who's driving. So there's like this relationship to their own identity, right? So there's sound, there's painting, there's sculpture, and guess what? There's also performance. Because you see all these cars in the line, right? Well, that's that. But if you know about what these drivers do with their cars is that you have this lane, but they swerve in and out of the lane as a performative thing, you know. And I think that's really very, very interesting. And it's really, and this is a Houston thing. So I want people to know that Houston has culture and all these other things, but a lot of times we don't talk about it or we don't theorize about it, you know. And that would be in the larger thing. There will also be like idea of blackness, which is something I'm interested in, Black social life. So you got all of these elements, performance, you got sculpture, you have sound, you have painting, and then you have this other thing of like this kind of breaking the norm, breaking out of the lines that's created for you. Those dotted lines for that lane, they break out of those spaces. So they work into the in-between and the not in-between, you know. So what's made and what's not made, and they created their own space. Not only just the culture, just the being of how they exist, you know. So I think that's important, you know. And then on this end, on the right side is the architectural thing, and this is about the looking at what causes like this kind of negation or housing situation to be boarded up. So there's this social and economic kind of invisibility where it creates this space. There's a politic that creates this space, and it goes with like working class and those who have not, right? But within that space, like I was talking about the houses earlier, within that space, there's this idea of, how do you configure or look at those things that have been negated? And so I started to look at the architecture and a lot of like the row houses and stuff and how they're boarded up. And to me, that speaks of visual language in terms of like its presentation to the public about a thing that you may or may not know about in terms of politics and economics and things of that nature, right? All that's important. So I think I'm looking at all of these things that basically are my surroundings, and I'm not trying to romanticize them, but I'm trying to look at them as they are, and like what happened, how do you think about these things as a material as you live in these spaces, and how can I place that in the art context for me, and how does that work with a visual aesthetic, a visual language, a language of sound, a language of things that you can touch. And also going back to the cars, I also want to say that's also like they're also collaborating with each other, which is also something that I'm interested in. So yeah, that's that.
This carving out of space is, I think this is amazing. Your observations about how these brothers are forming these parades, so to speak, these informal parades and swerving, and how certain housing features or homes are boarded up to either delimit the space, how the space can be negotiated. Homes are supposed to be navigated, and yet there's something that is causing them to be boarded up and serve as a barrier against what we would consider normal negotiation of that very comfortable space. These elbows, the way that they prevent people from getting close to, too close to the car.
Exactly.
It allow the driver to say without saying, don't get too close.
Right.
Let me do what I gotta do. I love that.
Let me be. Yeah, let me be. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I'll let you know when the time is right for you to come close. And I have that agency, authority, and that's how it works. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. All right. So that next slide, you move our pictures around.
So I guess when I started getting prior to this, I was going to do installation in row house, and I overheard real quickly. I overheard a young lady and talking about her daughter, and she was a Black woman, and she was talking about her hair and how her daughter's hair was beautiful and straight, And then another cat came in, and they weren't dating, but he was just a good friend. And I overheard him, like I'm on my laptop, you know, and I'm just doing my thing, but you know, they're talking loud, so I'm listening, because you know that's something. So they were like, he was like, man, you know, I'm having problems with girls, you know, and she was like, why? So he said, if I wasn't so dark, I probably can you know, pull somebody, which means, you know, find somebody that's interested.
Right.
And that struck me to be like, you know, this colorism thing is still ongoing, right? So I started to think about colorism, the paper, because for those who can't really tell, the substrate, what the images are on are paper bags. So the paper bags are like a grid, but also like the canvas of the drawing and the painting. And this is both of these images are made with Conte, graphite, trash bags, plastic, and paper bags. So again, this idea of reusing or using these everyday materials. And so I started looking into like the paper bag test. Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who were psychologists who were doing these doll tests based off of skin and what was considered beauty and not beautiful and value. This sociologist, Charlie Horton, who talked about the self, the looking glass self.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of formulated these drawings. Yeah.
So a little bit more for those viewers who may not be familiar with the paper bag test, in the South, particularly in Louisiana, not so much in Texas or Alabama or any of the deep southern states, but particularly in Louisiana, paper bag test was one of those, I guess, a barometer for determining acceptability, right? And because color has so much currency within the American construct, those African Americans or those people who were raced as other in this country were often determined to have more currency if their skin was as light as, if not lighter than, a paper bag. So I think that's brilliant to use that. It's not the first thing that the viewer would see,
right.
And to have that understanding and that historical perspective enables the reader to read so much more into the art. The fact that you know that and you're bringing that to the artwork is essential. It's what we're talking about when we focus on art as social justice. And you said it so beautifully in the opening. The humanities in general enable us to see ourselves clearly, see the world more clearly, and put some things into perspective that either are not commonly considered, are not obvious, but actually need to be unpacked if we're going to see each other as human and not as objects negotiating
right.
space in the
right.
world. I think it's beautiful. So, I love this one.
Yeah, that was, so that's How to Get Rich on a Shoestring Budget. It's a little humor in there, and there's also this idea of like currency and like how Black bodies became all over the world, became this object and this way to engage in capitalism. And so I was thinking about that in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, and also thinking about like passages and routes and mapping in hip hop, and how, because you know, fat shoelaces for breakdancers was like a staple in terms of wearing in your sneakers. And so to me, those relationships, and one thing I want to say as a side note is that the things that I place together, sometimes I'm not necessarily interested if they make sense going in. I put these things together because they're different ideas, and I feel like once they go in, they may or may make sense later. If not, that's fine. But I'm also interested in this kind of like disparate kind of relationships. So so the shoestring has nothing to do with transatlantic slave trade that I know of, but it has everything to do with in terms of mobility, you know, and everything in terms of consumption and consumerism, in terms of buying the shoestrings and what what having a certain kind of image attached to identity, hip hop identity, where that value system can lie, right? But it's still also relating to a part of an ensemble to make up the break dancer. So that's part to that. It's partly related to the identity.
I see a lot in this too, and it may not have been your intention, but to your point about the correlation between mobility and tennis shoes and the consumerism, conspicuous consumerism of late 80s, early 90s hip hop culture. Just the idea that the tennis shoes were a visual indication of sometimes the wearers being hood rich, not engaging in capitalism at all, but being, you know, in the sense of a producer, but being a consumer of the capitalist economy, within the capitalist economy, and tennis shoes were, and still are to a certain extent, you know, really front and center in terms of how certain groups participate within the capitalist construct, you know, not producing, but completely consuming. And yeah, it's a beautiful piece. Absolutely. Yeah, gorgeous, well thought out. And the paper bags are there too.
Yeah.
Really, really fascinating.
Thanks. So I left the, well, I didn't say I left the paper bags, but I said I moved into like these tablecloths and just trying to explore other materials, and started thinking about how this does go into architecture, but more so like floor plans, and how these designs, kind of the way someone else designed something, can place you in a position of following or not following those particular designs. And that's not to say that I have anything against these designs, but this is just kind of what I was thinking at the time. And so I was trying to think about the figurative, the black body, and abstraction, you know. But how do you? Because there is this argument that I know, at least from the Harlem Renaissance up to probably now, is like, how do you represent blackness, you know, and can you represent blackness in abstract, in terms of art? But I mean, and I say art, all of form. How do you represent blackness in, what is black art? What is the black aesthetic? How do we define those things, and who relates to those things, who exploit those things? And so that question about abstraction, or the non-representational and the representational in terms of a visual composition, was kind of what I was thinking about formally. And I was thinking about, again, space, how space is important. And it's funny you mentioned Ralph Ellison in and thinking about The Invisible Man, and the piece on the right is about, like, is basically about that. You know, you remember like when he went underground, or the protagonist, or the subject went underground and had all the lights and everything, and that's what she's holding, those lights. And then there's a part in Ralph Ellison where it was a young lady in church who said something and started singing, but nobody didn't expect her to be able to sing that well. So I thought about that kind of empowerment, but in a contained empowerment that's not necessarily visible, but at some point ripples through time and causes some kind of impact. So yeah, so that's funny you said that. And so like these are both references with the punk group Parliament and Funkadelic. Was obvious, like I Can Dance Underwater, that's from Aqua Boogie, from Aqua Boogie song. And then Every Cloud Has a Red Lining. You know, of course, the red lining pertains to this kind of exclusion, but it's also, there's a part in the song that says, so high I can't get over it, so low I can't get under it, so wide I can't get around it. And so like that kind of idea of what is that space? Like the void, it is a void, but it's also a space that you have to figure out how to navigate. So that's kind of what's going on the right. So yeah.
Exciting. It's exciting. I'm interested. I would be interested to know how younger audiences receive this kind of work, because as we'll talk about in the panel discussion, their disallowance from formal arts education and the defunding of arts programming in school has almost forestalled, stymied their ability to talk about these kinds of things, to really allow themselves to see and articulate their experiences. You know, that's one of the reasons that art is so important. So I would be curious to know when and how we're going to you're going to get in front of some young people and enable them to develop their self-awareness and articulate their own experiences the way that you are doing so well.
Well, yeah, well, I'm same as them. I mean, I went through that same pipeline, and I think like your contribution, especially to art education, is important. And I think we've become to the point. Maybe I'm being too general, but I think we've come to the point in terms of what you just said, to where I think it's normalized, and we don't really even understand the wealth of what could be with that type of education. Like we may not see all the possibilities of what we could have, right? And versus what's been taken away, and we've just kind of become adjusted to.
So let's talk about some of your multimedia. I don't want to skip any.
Okay.
You know, these pieces that you're showing are so important. Let's talk about a few more of them and get to some of the more multimedia. Don't go too quickly though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, come on, Don, because this is a fusion, it seems, of everyday and space, you know, that you had alluded to earlier. So
yeah,
take us through some of that.
Well, just I guess real briefly, basically it was at Project Row Houses, for those who don't know, Rick Lowe and others, including like oh man, I'm drawing a blank like everybody else. Who's Bird and anyway, it's a group. Rick Lowe is the one who's most known, but it was a group. Floyd Newsom, one.
Floyd Newsom, right?
And
Mackey.
Yeah, Frederick. Yeah, Mackey and
Michelle Barnes.
Michelle Barnes, your mom. There's a lot of people that helped develop Row House. So they set up a few row houses where artists can create installations, and also help mothers who get back on their feet. So this particular piece is about the idea of what does our eye plays tricks on us, and also the idea of migration and movement and existential migration. So basically what I've done is I played with this idea of turning what we assume to be an interior and created it as an exterior. So it's basically a house, the exterior of a row house on the interior of a row house. So it's basically a flip. But then there's this kind of portal created where one has to think about breaking in or breaking out, right? Into this other space what we see here. And I recorded two women, which is a sound piece, talking about their experiences. One's from Nigeria, and one's a Black woman from Nigeria and Black woman from America, United States. And so actually it's a cool hope. And they, I create the sound to kind of collapse and like mix and go over and under each other, as the idea of thinking about that kind of relationship between the continent, specifically Nigeria and the United States, in a romanticized view and in a reality view, you know. So it's this kind of in and out, and how one looks back and one looks forward. So
Who had the more romantic perspective?
Neither one, because they knew what the deal was. You know, they
Yeah.
talked about how they initially like, and I think you could think about like Pan-Africanism, looking at Africa, but there's a way some people in the States look at Africa as everything is great, and that's not the reality. And so, and that is the same way some Africans who come to the States or view the state as is just kind of everything is great. And to the degree where sometimes we treat each other in some weird, distant way because of that, those narratives or those imaginations, right? And I think there is I think we as Black people in the United States we kind of created ourselves. We deserve this identity for ourselves. But I think
The American identity for
yes,
ourselves, African-American identity.
the Black American identity should be definitely a thing. It should be a thing, and shouldn't be any questions about it. But still, there's still like this. There's even complications in that where people will not even agree to that when that is the reality. You know, I mean, if you're coming from Nigeria, you're Nigerian. If you go to Nigeria from the United States, you're Black American. And trying to look at it outside of that and romanticize, and that's not saying you can't be relational. You know what I mean? Like I have a cousin, but that cousin is not me, and I'm not my cousin. And my cousin experiences are different from mine, although we come from the same lineage. And so I'm thinking about that. So I'm not looking at it in a romantic way, and I don't think they were either, because they spoke about, the Nigerian woman spoke about how she assumed, like, the way she was taught was Black people were lazy and America were lazy. They didn't do this, they didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it shaped her view. And then she started to realize that that wasn't the reality, you know. So we got to think about these things from the nuances and not just these kind of framed narratives or conversations that we are fed. You know, we have to think about things a little more critically. So that's kind of what this thing is about, I think.
So I love this
I didn't mean to go that far.
I think it's all really important, you know, turning the inside outside, just looking at something, changing the perspective. I think that what you said is right in line with what this piece indicates here. Is that a backlit?
Yes. So that's a backlit image on plexiglass, and that image is actually from abandoned home I was able to sneak into and take photographs.
Beautiful.
And of that, yeah. And so this is some of the interior of that house, just to show. And so I'm looking at this again, looking at the vernacular and the space I'm in through, you know, a lens also of aesthetics. You know, these are things we see all the time. You know, we see the windows covered with silver aluminum to try to prevent heat from, you know, so that idea of engineering, you know, but then I put gold paper on there to just show like a value, add a little twist to it, but you know, you still get it. You know?
And the fact that this is still an interior.
It's still an interior.
Is, yeah.
But then, you know, it's an interior, then it goes with the shopping cart, becomes an exterior again. So this is like a kind of like an endless kind of loop, I guess you would call it.
Right. Which then sings duck rabbit? You know, which are you seeing? Which you see the rabbit or do you see the duck? And I love that play. It's really, really fascinating.
And this is also a play on inside, outside, just synthetic and real hair, and it's called hairline fractures. So basically the one in the museum, just a simple crack, and you can really overlook it. It looks like a line drawing, but once you get up on it, you see that it's like carving into the wall. And then I placed this hair that I collected from barbershops. And then I said, well, you know, I'm always thinking about both spaces. So I said, well, what about how that works outside, you know? So I started placing hair in like different old homes or on buildings. So then I started thinking that's where that kind of graffiti kind of background kind of slip in. And then some of those spaces end up being torn down. So like this house on the right was right across, for those okay, now only Michon probably know what I'm talking about. It's right across the street from the Emancipation Park, but they tore that house down. So it's this idea about memory and like about presence, and then like bringing attention to art or the something that's not seen, even by tracing something that people won't see necessarily unless they come across it or paying attention. So it's not like it's for everybody. It's just for those who actually happen to look that way, you know.
Right. And be in tune, being on a certain frequency to constantly be looking for art and beauty and truth.
Right.
Everywhere, not just in expected places. I love that.
So this is it's a sound piece. And I'm not gonna play much of it, but play it. So. Oh, it's called We Be Off Minor.
Is your volume up?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, stop it. Yeah.
So this I wasn't able to hear very clearly the music. Was she controlling the sound? Oh, was that what the orange box was?
Yeah, that was a distortion pedal that you connect to guitar, electric guitar, to distort the sound. And the brush was mic'd, so I mic'd the brush. And so I was just thinking about this idea of politics in hair, and like what kind of song could the hair sing and produce with the help of an assistant or somebody else playing along. So it's like almost like an ensemble, thinking about musicality and sound and ensembles and groups and how they work together, right? So
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That there's a voyeuristic quality too, though. you know, especially for people who have not ever touched hair. You know, there's this big social phenomenon about touching Black people's hair, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that
That's what I mean by the part of the politics of it. Yeah.
Yeah. This exhibition of hair play is quite interesting. Wow. I hope that the viewers will understand and maybe even have questions when they tune in. They'll have questions that will allow you to talk a little bit more about that. I think it's fascinating. So we get into these quilts, these mixed use, or
Yeah. And I'm just going to go through them. I'm not going to talk about because it's time consuming, but all I was thinking about is like there's a book. I don't know the writer's name, but it's called Hidden Figures, and it's about quilting. I think her first name is Margot, though.
Is this the G's Ben?
Yeah, no, not the G's Ben. I think it's called, I think it was Margot Shelter or Shelley or something like that. And she wrote this book about she was saying that the quilts, and I think she was being specific, and her family it is about G's Ben quilting, but not that book though. Not about the whole, you know, like the whole thing, but just like her family. And
Margot Shetterly.
Something like that. Right, right. And so she talks about the Underground Railroad and how the slaves used these quilts for communication. Now, there have been arguments that that's untrue. Some people said it is true. I think even if it's not true in the sense that they had codes in the traditional sense, like saying this shape means go to the left, I think there's still visual language that did communicate something. So I thought about using, again, going back to the vernacular, and I started looking at iconography and like, how can I actually create, you know, like be part of that conversation and communicate with patterns and symbols and things of that nature. And so the way that I thought that I can do it was, you know, bringing these symbols and things that I'm familiar with, but I also incorporated musical drum notations to help create patterns from songs. I can read some drum music, but I can't read the other stuff. But so a lot of the lines and everything are representative, like quarter notes and eighth notes and snares and hi-hats and bass drum. So like in this one, you'll see the pattern is based off of say Kendrick Lamar's, I think either Damn song, I think. And also you see the swingers from what I showed you earlier in the car culture embedded in this piece. So this thing is actually in photography. So this, using the conversation of the quilting, I am actually saying something in the composition, right? This is actually a coded message. So there's no question about it being or not being. Now, what that coded message is not going to be revealed, you know? So, but yeah, so that's how I'm thinking about these quilts. And just for those who don't know, these quilts are, these ideas of quilts are made of duct tape, paper, and black plastic. And thinking about these materials. And for me, duct tape is a reparative. Like if people think about like when, for example, working class and poor people, especially when I was young, when something broke, you would get some gray tape and try to fix it. Well, the idea of quilting to me is also reparative and restorative in that sense, that you use all these different materials to fix something, to make something. And not only that, but it's not just an object of like to view, but it's an object that's passed down. So it has this history where all the things come from, but it also talks about the now. And then there's like this kind of future thinking, imaginative thinking, or that it will go to someone, after the person who has the quilt. So there's a whole idea about time and space.
It's
right?
beautiful.
So,
These literacies, different levels of literacy that you're accentuating or amplifying. And I just to hear you talk about, I mean, we talked about art on numerous occasions, but I'm always blown away by not just your understanding about your own work, right? But about the work that you perceive the work should be doing. There's always this aspirational element, and the frequencies on which you're operating are such a high level. This blurring of the line between outside and inside, subjectivity, objectivity, it is something that promotes equity, harmony, or at least challenges status quo so that other people can begin to think about those ideas in ways that promote change, promote symbiosis, promote transformation. And so it's beautiful, absolutely amazing.
So now getting to the thinking about young people, thinking about the idea of collaboration, thinking about exchange, representation. Yeah. So a lot of things going on in this thing here that I call acknowledgement, the historical polyrhythms of being, and hopefully everyone see that S. It's plural. And so, but is it though? It is and it's not. So the way that I came about. So for those who, this is the Contemporary Art Museum of Houston, and right now, due to COVID gave them the time to redesign the way the CAM is going to look in the future. So I was at Yale, so I didn't know what was going on here. But before that, I applied for a grant, 2 grants. One was the Art and Social Justice grant. The other one is a Dean's Critical Practice grant that I was blessed to be awarded. And though the idea that I was thinking behind that was to consider fugitivity, the idea of fugitivity, the way that Fred, and blackness, the way that Fred Moulton talks about it, in terms of always trying to escape and move. And so we've been talking about space and moving throughout space, one that's even defined, and then how one kind of operates within the space. So that's been part of my conversation throughout this talk. So that was that. And then the other thing is language. So thinking about the philosopher, maybe Antonio Gramsci, and in an essay, it's called Folklore, something, I can't remember, but it's Folklore in Language and something else. But he's mainly talking about how in terms of equity, there's value in all forms of language, where they come from, those that would be considered the like royalty or tradition or formal, but then there's the idea of informal. And so he also talks about like that hegemony and how one can fight a particular fight against a particular group with their own form of hegemony. And so I started to think about that really specifically, about how do I create the idea of movement within a practice, and then also what's being moved within the community, right? And the particular communities that I focus on was 3rd, 4th, and 5th Ward in Houston, and it's Black historical neighborhoods. And there's all kinds of movement that's going on that's kind of either forced movement or voluntary movement in many different ways, literally and symbolically. And there's always this kind of transformation happening. And so I wanted to pair that up with the idea of making or creating art. So before I even got to the CAM, I was thinking, how do I do that? And so I felt like one way to do it was engage in all different forms of art, and one thing informs the next, but it becomes one piece over time. And not only does it exist in the studio, it also exists out in the public. And then there's another public, the virtual public. And then at the end of all of this, which Dr. Benson is part of, is writing or creating an essay to kind of place this into something way much more smarter than I can articulate, you know. So while I was thinking about that, I got a call from the CAM, from the director, Hesse, and he asked, Hesse.
Oh, but not Kenitra. Okay, I was thinking that.
No, not Kenitra.
Okay, who is a Rutgers graduate, by the way. But,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he asked me, did I want to do a public art piece? And I was like, yeah, you know, what's going on? So I got all the details and whatnot. So I thought about, how do I incorporate someone outside of myself, right, in this piece? Because it was one part that I really wanted to do, which is, you see this text, but then these other things came in terms of the backpack. So I asked around, and I asked the people who knew kids who lived in these areas to donate their old backpack that they didn't want anymore for new ones, exchange for new ones. And so we did the exchange. And this is one exchange on the left is at the CAM. And then the other exchange is at Shape Community Center, which is the community center in Third Ward that does have a lot of programming. So we did that exchange. And for me, first of all, just having this exchange was a beautiful sentiment within itself, you know. Especially
not taking something away, but restoring.
Right. Because later on you'll see down the line that I'm very aware that my experience is not, and the things that I do is not solely me. I mean, we've talked about how my experience, community, and all these things help shape. So even with that, I know that there's a part where I have to contribute back, give back, collaborate with, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So, and just before the lights cut off, I'm going to say that because anything can happen, boom, you know, before we go further, I'm going to say this. There was money donated for this project in terms of people who couldn't give backpacks, but they wanted to help participate. 100% of those funds went back to the group that could accept funds. Now, like Jack Yates was a student, so there was money I couldn't give to Jack Yates. But like Shape Center received funding. The Change Happened, which is also in Third Ward, they received, like, I split the money up and gave it back to them, which is the thing that I hope other artists understand how important that is. Especially when you artists that are doing community-based projects, social art projects, or social art practices, don't just go into a space and be a vampire, right? You don't do that. And in certain neighborhoods, people are gonna call you out for that, and it can get dangerous. But I'm not going to go there. So just be wise. If you're going into a neighborhood or community or a group or organization or whatever, you need to help, and those people are helping you, you need to help them. And so I bring up like the collective, like, you know, there's nothing that I would not do for Michon or her mom because of the things that they've done for me. So that's a note. So before anything happens, you know, the world ends, we go past this point. That's a very important point. Okay, so now we'll get real quickly. So
tell me something about the psycho slab acknowledgement, hold up, black space. Like what?
Yeah. So the thing about the language that Gramsci talks about, he also talks about the intellectual, right? We all intellectual. Now, whether we use the type of, whether the intellectualism is acknowledged whether it be formally or informally, or how we use it or where we use it, those are different things. But we all have this thing innate, you know, and how we perceive and see things and decipher. So I wanted to play with words that in some sense, people think about long words, multi-syllabic words as some kind of correlation to intelligence. But then there's also this idea of playing with words and messing around with words that's not necessarily in the academic field necessarily, but out in what you call the street, right? Where you got slang. That has value as well. So these both of them have value, but they're probably not necessarily perceived that way. Then I started thinking about going back to Parliament, the Psycho Ako Disco Beto Bayako Dulu, Cadillac Music by Outkast, Southern Playalistic, you know, all of these words that you make up. So, and I'm very into self-identifying and again, creating space for yourself in all kinds of formulations. And this is one of them. So it says Psycho Slab, Acknowledge Maine, Hold Up, Black Spatialistic. And so if you are from certain neighborhoods, particularly 3rd, 4th, and 5th Ward, you're going to recognize slab, because that's a word that I talked about earlier in terms of the car culture. You're going to recognize Maine Hold Up, because that is a slang phrase that's Houston specific.
Fat Pack, Corey Blunt.
Exactly. But also it's embedded in all these other words, right? And these other words, I don't know what the test is. I think it is about what we talked about earlier about the gestalt, about seeing a duck or a rabbit and all those things. Like, what do you see first can probably determine something about yourself, you know, maybe, or what you recognize, you know. So I wanted to make this whole word, and I want to think about this word and not only in terms of like reading, but in terms of sound, you know. And so like this is really related to those music titles. So the whole idea is talking about acknowledgement. I'm pulling out the acknowledgement from John Coltrane's album, and where he repeats the love supreme. And I guess I'll mention that's part of this thing too, literally. And then I'm pulling out Black Spatialistic, thinking about like the spatial imaginary and like how do we foresee the future. So all of these things are all in it. And that's just what I put in it, or what I'm thinking about. People can read it in a whole different way, which is fine, you know. But I just really wanted to play with language and think about text and think about how language can operate. And I think there's a phenomenology idea behind it, aspect behind it too, because it is so powerful. And thinking about the billboard, graphic design, you know, all those kind of things, and how do we respond to those? How do we respond to advertising, you know, and things like that. So yeah, that was the thing that I knew I wanted to do. And so, but then how do you push that thing further? And so we get into like these backpacks, and they light up at night. So they're not lit up in the daytime. It's just this, once it comes like 8:30, starts to get dark, then they come on because they're timed. And that's an interesting thing too, because now we're talking about in between day and night and what something does in the daytime as opposed to in relation to what something does at night. You know, so this is full circle spectrum of operation, you know, and thinking about that stuff.
How there's this glow, right? There's this glow within the backpack that's not seen until someone actually catches it at the right time and is able to stop and acknowledge. You know, even in the throes of civil unrest and this whole idea of police reform, the notion of stopping, right, not shooting first, stopping to acknowledge the humanity of the subject, and being able to, you know, really consider the person who is being interrogated or who is perhaps going to be apprehended. Just that pause. When I passed by this piece, I want to stop and read it. I want to stop and make sense of the word. I don't just want to fly by it and assume that it's something that I've seen before or something that I already understand. It is different every time I pass by. And so I give it the respect. I give it another look before I pass it up. And, you know.
Yeah, and that's an important point too. I think there's a rush to judgment, you know, this rush to violence and aggression. Um, yeah, and you know, you're right about the whole dynamic, particularly like policing and like thinking about the type of aggression towards Black people in that manner, and the neglect of reflection. Why am I doing this? Why do I give orders to excuse me, other people to do this, you know? And I think the you know, that's it's something, that's a strong point you made. It is something to think about. Yeah. So yeah, I think all of that.
I
I
pass
appreciate
by it often. Yeah, it's really powerful, and it's different every time I pass by. I see certain things more readily, you know, at certain times than I do at other times. And no matter how much I think I can pronounce that, I have to slow myself down and really think about what it means. And it's really it's an interesting piece in the middle of the pandemic when so many places within the city look as though they are abandoned or not as frequented. People might pass this and say, "Oh, well, that's just maybe that's something associated with construction." But when they see it, you know, they are compelled to actually look at it and say, "No, this is not something that's popped up, you know, haphazardly because of the pandemic or want of care. There's nothing negligent about that piece. It didn't arise out of want. It is a purposeful exhibit and it needs to be looked at." It's amazing. It's really, really smartly done.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then there are images within the objects. This one happens to be Mickey Lehman, an activist and politician. So yeah, and then there's the recognition of the spaces. And then this is a little short 40-second video. I think it's 46 seconds, just to give you an idea of.
Mm-hmm. Is there a rhythm to it? Is there a particular rhythm
Yeah,
that likes?
it's a Morse code. It's in Morse code, and it's slowed down a bit from your normal speed. And it's almost like a song. So I was thinking musically and thinking about looking at. I was thinking about seeing but hearing. So it says "A Love Supreme" 3 times, like the song. "A Love Supreme, a Love Supreme," and then there's a short piece from an essay from James Baldwin, "Uses of the Blues." And so I think I wrote it down somewhere. Let's see. Okay, so it says, people who in some sense know who they are can't change the world always, but they can do something to make it a little more, to make life a little more human. And then there's another part to it that's from Solange's song "Mad." And then in that part of the verse that's in the piece, it says, "You got the light, count it all joy. You got the right to be mad. But when you carry it alone, you find it only getting in the way. They say you got to let it go. Let it go, let it. And then it goes back to, once it finishes that verse, it says, "A Love Supreme" again. Then it pauses and the lights stay on for 10 seconds. And then it repeats. So I'm thinking, like, this is an interesting way to create another song, you know, from light, you know. And then like you say, the rhythm of it, it speaks to you in a way that you may not know how it's speaking to you. you know, and it's not like Christmas lights, and it's very purposeful, very specific to the point, and the text kind of works in a way of saying, because we know that James Baldwin has always said that to be Black in America is to be angry.
Constant state of rage.
Right. And rage, right. And so now he's talking about this humanistic approach. But then the flip is when Solange is talking about being mad, and you have that right. But then again, you have that right. And you also should acknowledge or recognize that there's a weight and a burden to that. And releasing that allows you to move further. You know, so there's a nuance there. And then the love supreme repetition to kind of wrap it up. So
I love that.
Yeah, so that's
amazing. Okay, so we're actually at the hour and 30 minute. No, but this is great. We can continue. I just want to let you know what the time is, and to give viewers an idea of, just to kind of take a station break. We are talking with Nathaniel Donnett, artist extraordinaire, native Houstonian, who is now earning his MFA at Yale University. And he's walking us through some of the pieces that are part of his most recent work, certainly helping us chart his history as an artist. And it's just been a fascinating conversation. So we're looking at some of the multimedia pieces now, and talk about this one, Nate.
So this is Fifth Ward. This is a Wheatley High School. The other one before that was Fourth and Third. So these are pieces that will be in the book. And this particular piece are some found binders. And so when I was looking up, Fifth Ward, and came across Wheatley and the state it's in terms of its education and the tests and how the students were scoring. And it's also in the center of like this really this impoverished neighborhood circumstance, you know. And I want to be careful when I say that, because I don't want to give like any currency to the Black suffering narrative, but there is some issues that can be hopefully resolved in terms of the education and the funding of the school. So what I wanted to do was create an intervention. And so that intervention is basically these binders, and these binders kind of create this kind of a maze, and also thinking about boundaries and like being blocked, trying to make space, but also being blocked. And like there's no information in the binders, but we know binders to have in terms of school, some kind of information in it, but there's nothing there, you know? So like the thing is the nothingness of it. What does that mean? Like nothing for the students, nothing in terms of information being given, nothing in terms of how the school is perceived in relationship to other schools, our school districts, nothing in terms of the funding, nothing in terms of rejecting what's been given or what's been assumed. So it's like the idea of emptiness, you know. And this, of course, this was recently done, so there was no school at the time. So I did this over the summer. So there was no school here. So
fascinating.
And it's all part of the bigger thing. Just to go back to the acknowledgement part, there's an acknowledgement. There's different components of the bigger picture. So we saw the CAM piece. So like there's an acknowledgement piece for these pieces that's kind of like interventions public. There's an acknowledgement piece that's going to be online, and there's an acknowledgement piece for the book in terms of like what acknowledgement means, and there's different facets. So yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah.
Personally. So this is another thing I put up I forgot the name of the lounge, but it's right across the street from Doshi House on Emancipation. And this is the very last thing I've done before I left Houston. Is this piece here? So it's made of shoestrings. It's a old guitar, and there's kente cloth covering the whole piece, and then the shoestrings in the front. And I don't necessarily know what it means, other than it was an impulse. And I was really interested in materials, thinking about the materials being used in the way that I haven't seen or that I haven't done before, and placed it on an instrument. So that I've actually did a thing where I had they reboarded this thing. I put a photograph on here before that I've taken in Acres Home and brought it to Third Ward to think about crossing spaces. And I did the same thing with Fifth Ward and Fourth Ward. So it's like that, like in terms of the quadrant. So then they cleared it all out, I guess. And so I put some back up on there. So, so I can go through these real quick.
Take us to, yes, let's go through those. Take us to the meteorite piece.
Okay.
Don't go too fast. I feel so bad.
Oh, okay.
No, that's cool. But I'm just, just to give, and I'm going to post some of these, the ones that you prefer. I'll post images in the actual article or the essay that's on the site. But just this was an amazing project.
This is one thing that Dr. Benson participated in. This is What's the New News, and I was just thinking about public art, historical and important businesses or organizations in the neighborhood, and controlling the narrative through experimental and informed writing, and also collaboration. So the news racks that house the newspapers were made by other artists, and the newspapers, I invited writers, including Dr. Benson, to write for the pieces. And then up the top left corner is Josie Pickens, who's also an educator at Texas Southern University and a writer. And she held a youth writing workshop. And, at the end of that, we gave I think 3 people won 3 gift certificates to Barnes and Noble's bookstore. So I didn't want to say that. So here's Dr. Benson's article.
You can pass over that.
Everybody pay attention before the lights go out. You could go to isu.com and you can see all of What's the New News iterations, and and then
what's so great about this community of artists that you created, the collaborative effort in creating a newspaper, and the stands out of which people pull their papers, reflecting on community, talking about the power of Black art and the Black imagination. I mean, I thought it was a great piece. I was really happy to be a part of that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think it's important that people control their narratives. This real quickly is the t-shirt thing I created. This is to the left is an ad that was in Arts Magazine in Houston, local magazine. And there's a story behind it besides what we see, but just go real quickly. John Biggers, who's one of the founders of the TSU Art Department, wasn't allowed to go into the Houston Museum of Fine Arts to receive an award because of the Jim Crow era. So he had to go the next day. So I wanted to kind of speak on that. But then the other picture is thinking about like this idea of being the only Black person in a space, whether you look at that negatively or positively or whatever, but that's real quickly. And also Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing in the film.
Why are the brothers on the wall? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you can't see it, but the pants on the right, they have boxers. And so the guy, whoever wearing these jeans, sagging, but those images on the right are all like Black historical figures.
Yeah, I see Hurston and W.B. Du Bois.
Yeah, I can't see it because it's yeah. And Huey Newton's on there. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's the meteorite piece. So this is something I did at Yale, and there's a Afro-pessimism about it. And this is asphalt that I found around the neighborhood, and then some sneakers that I got. And I was just thinking about this kind of aspirational attempt into being successful, but being Black, and where all of the aspirations of being Black still can regulate you to a space not to where you're trying to aspire to, regardless of how you see yourself. And what happens, I think, is that in media, we are bombarded with images or celebrities or people who considered to be successful in the sense financially. And those substitutes or those so-called avatars are placed in front of us, and it gives an illusion that we've made it as a group, and we have not. I would say the same thing about, President Obama, where when he was president, everyone thought it was all good, and color blindness, post-racial was the talk of the town, and we didn't have to worry about these things. But we realized that the police brutality increased in numbers during his presidency. So this piece is really kind of represents that idea of false illusions, and is interesting in the art context because art is all about illusions in a sense. When you're painting paintings, it's a painting of a thing, an interpretation of a thing. A photograph, even though it may seem realistic, is just an object, and it's through the lens and through the viewership of that particular photographer. It is not your experience necessarily. It's just an interpretation of your experience. So that idea of what's real and what's not, what's placed upon us and what's not, and how do we respond to it, is kind of the thing I'm thinking about. And we understand that a meteorite is in the sky, but it eventually comes crashing, And I can't remember the verse, but I know Andre 3000 mentions that too, like, shooting stars and stuff like that. So yeah, and then in terms of composition, I'm also thinking about this in-between space that Fred Moten talks about. The between a hard space and the soft space, and like in between, like that space, and being bound up to the hardness, it's not bound to the pillow. So why not? Why is it not bound to the soft thing versus the hard thing that's pulling all the weight to it? And how do you remove, or if it can be removed from the hard thing and connect it directly to the soft thing, the most vulnerable thing?
Or is blackness the hard place? You're bound between a rock, literally, and a hard place.
It's all about blackness for sure. Yeah. So.
Really interesting. Okay, so I think we have time for one more. We can go to percussion and repercussions.
Okay.
Yeah, percussion and repercussion.
Percussion and repercussion.
Yeah.
So I'll do it real short, but just to say it's in 3 parts. There's a part for police brutality and recognizing who's passed, and then there's the end part where you get the repercussions. That would be I on the drums.
If I can get this.
looking back at that piece now, is there, does it affect you the way that it did or the way that you thought it would when you initially composed it?
It's a difficult piece for me, for a lot of reasons. When I composed it, I was trying to show both sides, but at the same time, both sides not equal, and both positions are not equal. And when you talk about equity, then there's no reason for I don't think, for that particular type of policing, period. So I still feel the same way. I don't think I'm probably less optimistic about it, the reasons for making it, than I was then. So.
Well, I'm blown away. I'm really looking forward to hosting or moderating. I'm not even going to host. I'm moderating the conversation that you're going to have with your peers. And I'm looking forward to just sitting back and listening to all of you share your perspectives and to continue to elaborate on some of the important issues that we've touched on today. So before we leave today, is there something that you'd like to share? Maybe where you think your art is going in particular, or where you plan to push your art in the future?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to formulate like what I'm doing, and in a sense theorizing it, maybe if I can get to that point, the whole idea about dark imaginarians. And if you go to my website, you could kind of get more input on information on that. So that's one thing I'm thinking about doing. I think that I'm going to continue to do these things, and I'm considering doing more public artworks too. I mean, I don't know. It's just like I kind of just do it, So I don't really know. I just say check it out and see what I'm doing next. I think that's the best. Yeah, that's the best I can do.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talent, your insight. And we'll.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.